As the debris of NHL free agency clears, the Edmonton Oilers are biding their time. Is that good or bad? On today's edition of Locked On Oilers.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Wednesday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. I just wrapped up my third NHL season as a host on the Locked On Podcast Network, and I want to thank everyone that is making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's show, we are going to unpack the opening salvos of NHL free agency and the trade market from an Oilers perspective. We will start with the Evan Bouchard extension. We're going to pivot in our second segment to talking about the Victor Arvidsson salary dump trade to the Bruins. And then we'll tie a bow on today's show by talking about where the Oilers stand financially, players they were linked to who ultimately moved on. We'll touch on Corey Perry and Connor Brown moving on as well. But to get things started, to get this conversation flowing, it was essential that the Edmonton Oilers took care of Evan Bouchard on a number of fronts. Number one, most importantly, he's their best defenseman. And I know there are going to be people who want to say Ekholm is still their best defenseman. I am inclined to say that Bouchard going forward is going to be this team's best defenseman. I think there's an argument he is amongst the top 15 at worst defensemen in the entire world. This is one of the best playoff performers in the NHL right now. The only defenseman who averages more career points per game at that position in the history of the sport's Bobby Orr. Anytime you're in the same sentence as Bobby Orr, you're doing something right. And number two, this is how you tell Connor McDavid you are serious about maintaining a serious Stanley Cup contender around him. You think about the first 7 years of the McDavid-Draisaitl tenure and the variety of defensemen they tried and auditioned, and Oscar Klefbom's injury, unfortunate byproduct of the physical nature of the sport. But Klefbom, Darnell Nurse, Duncan Keith, not terrible choices, but none of them the caliber of player of Bouchard. And this is one of the real benchmark skill sets you need to have. And it doesn't need to be as offense first. You can win with your best defenseman being skewed towards defense, as the Florida Panthers have exhibited with Gus Forsling. But you think about this just purely from a roster building standpoint. If you decided we can't afford to keep him, we need that $10.5 million to fill out our roster, there was not a defenseman available within. I can't even think of a defenseman that I would feel even moderately good about as a replacement for Evan Bouchard that was available in free agency. And quite a few of the candidates didn't even get there. I know there might be a little devil on your shoulder whispering they could have did 1 year of Brent Burns. And yes, on the surface, Brent Burns probably would be passable, but not nearly the caliber of play driver he used to be. And frankly, not nearly as good as the play driver Evan Bouchard is now. And I know the number is a lot. $10.5 million is an unfathomable amount of money for most people. It makes Evan Bouchard one of the highest paid defensemen in the entire NHL. This puts him ahead of Darnell Nurse, and I know there's been quite a bit of pointing and laughing from other fan bases that the Oilers are paying Bouchard and Nurse about $20 million combined, when most people know they would like to get rid of Darnell Nurse, but his full no movement clause precludes that. So when you're paying that much for two defensemen, it puts you in a really difficult spot. We'll see what ends up happening with the Dallas Stars with Thomas Harley and Miro Heiskanen going forward. There's a world where those two combined could push for $20 million relatively easily. I was very surprised, to see the number that Vladislav Gavrikov came in at only $7 million per year when I expected it to be between 8 and 9. So him and Adam Fox, that's only $16 million. Still a lot of money for two defensemen, especially for someone Gavrikov who's not going to put up counting stats, somebody who's more of a defense first guy. But this is one of the signs to Connor, to Leon, hey, we are serious about maintaining this. And from a roster perspective and organization perspective, this gives you cost certainty for the remainder of Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl's physical primes. And Connor and Leon, not old. 27, 28, 29. Those are not old by any measure. And generally speaking, those types of players, the superstars of the world, they age more gracefully. They don't have dramatic drop-offs where they go from being point per game players to half a point per game player in 1 or 2 seasons. That's a gradual over time thing. You look at how well Sidney Crosby, Alex Ovechkin, Geno Malkin are still playing to this day. And those guys are in their late 30s, 37, 38, 39, and Connor and Leon have a long way to go before they get there. But you lock up Evan Bouchard for his age 26, 27, 28, and 29 seasons, while Connor, assuming, is going to sign a 3 or a 4 year deal, and Draisaitl's locked up for 8. So you have your number 1 defenseman, your number 2 center, and then you get to tell Connor, hey, man, beyond you 3, yeah, we have Hyman, we have Nugent-Hopkins, we have Darnell Nurse. You are our core 6 guys. In an ideal world, we'd find a way to get out from under that Nurse number, but we know you guys like each other. We're amenable to making this work. We're going to have to be squeezed. We're going to have to be threadbare in other parts of our lineup just because we don't have the money. But we're going to get creative here around you guys. And now that we have some cost certainty of what Bouch and Leon are going to cost the next few years, where does that put you at? What number can we work with for you so that we can put all of this together and then from there have a real operating budget to understand where we're going? Because now that you have Bouch at 10.5, you got Draisaitl at 14. Okay, we're at 24.5 million. What's Connor getting? Is Connor getting 16, 17, maybe even $18 million per year? Are we going to be north of $42 million for 3 players? Then Nurse will put us over 51 million. Hyman and Nugent-Hopkins will put us in the low 60s, and then we'll have about $35 million to fill out the rest of the lineup, because that becomes a challenge. And we're going to talk about that more in our second and third segments as far as the lineup holes and the money, because those are essential components and questions we have. I know the Oilers were linked to a handful of guys out there like Brock Besser, who ended up signing back in Vancouver at a number the Oilers could not have matched. I mean, even after trading Victor Arvidsson, the Oilers only have about $5 million in cap space, and Brock signed for over $7 million to stay in Vancouver. So that was out of the question. Connor Garland signed for about $6 million to stay in Vancouver. That probably also out of the question without an additional subsequent move, which also would have given the Oilers another hole in their lineup, because don't look now, but after trading Victor Arvidsson, after trading Evander Kane, after letting Jeff Skinner walk in free agency, the Oilers have a lot of holes in their forward group. And I know they're going to find a way to replace some of these holes, but you lose 4 forwards from your starting 12 in a single offseason. It's going to require some creativity to fill in those gaps. Now, I'm not saying that's impossible. Teams do it all the time. Good teams are going to feel the cap crunch and get squeezed and lose good pieces. But now you're going to have to be a little more resourceful. Now you're going to have to be a little more creative. And speaking of getting creative, the Oilers only got a 5th-round pick for Victor Arvidsson. But coming up next, I'm going to tell you why that's probably about as good as you were going to do. Coming up next on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. Did you ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is so much more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you are building real wealth. Something I've definitely been guilty of at various points in my life is not saving enough for the things I want to do and ending up needing to borrow. And instead, since I signed up for Monarch, I was able to build out a savings plan, get to the target number, and book the vacation I cannot wait to go on in August. So if you are ready to take control of your finances with Monarch Money today, use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com. for 50% off your first year subscription. One more time, that's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year's subscription. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Oilers after the opening dust has begun to settle from free agency, and we'll have a deeper dive on Evan Bouchard later in the week, but I did want to cover the topical news as we go. I know the Bouchard news broke in the middle of the day late yesterday. I wasn't able to get another episode out on top of the episode that was already recorded, so I wanted to make sure I covered all of my bases best I could, because I understand you have a lot of options when it comes to your content, and if I don't do as good a job as I can, you're not going to stick around. And it's my goal to make you a little bit smarter, to give you more information, to help you be as informed as you can be when it comes to the Oilers. And with that said, I was very excited last summer when the Oilers signed Victor Arvidsson and Jeff Skinner. I thought it was a really inspiring decision to see the Oilers say, no, we don't need to get bigger and more physical. We just need more guys who can put the puck in the net. And both Skinner and Arvidsson had significant NHL track records of successfully contributing to offense. Now, neither is what I would classify as a play driver, someone who can make their own offense, who create for others, but both are pretty strong supporting cast members. Jeff Skinner's got a couple 30-goal seasons under his belt. Arvidsson's got a couple 50, 60, even a 70-point season under his belt. Those are good supplementary players, and they were both coming off of depressed value seasons. Jeff Skinner was bought out from that ludicrous Buffalo contract that we all knew was bad the moment Buffalo offered it. And then Victor Arvidsson was coming off of a serious injury. He only played 15 regular season games in 2023-2024 for the LA Kings. He had 18 points in those 15 games, but Arvidsson profiled as the ideal prove-it contract guy. In his early 30s, coming off of a serious injury, had enough of a sample at the end of the previous season to say, no, I'm healthy. You can sign me. And I thought the practice, the execution here was good. I liked what Arvidsson and Skinner brought in terms of their skill sets to this Oilers team. The problem, of course, being I don't think the Oilers really got what they wanted out of either guy. And I think some of that is maybe a matter of the fact it was Jeff Jackson, who's the president of the team, who made those signings, made those offers, as opposed to the GM. We know Ken Holland, his contract expired at the end of the season after the 24 season. So Jeff Jackson on an interim basis stepped up and did the GM role, signed some free agents, made a trade or two. And then based on that, the Oilers were in a bit of a financial pickle. That's what made them vulnerable to the offer sheets from St. Louis, and they ultimately had to make the Cody Ceci trade, and they had to figure out some ways to make the money work all the way around. But the idea was right. Getting low-cost, high-upside guys like Arvidsson and Skinner, who had lots of NHL experience, who were professionals, who were veterans, as supplementary roles. And as the Oilers, you're a Stanley Cup contender, and you're offering the opportunity to play with Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. Now, Jeff Skinner, I think, falls into a different category because he just very clearly, Chris Knoblauch did not see the vision there. Chris Knoblauch did not feel Jeff Skinner's game translated to what he wanted, especially in a top six role. We know that at the start of the year last year, Skinner got a look with both McDavid and Draisaitl, and I really wish Knoblauch had been a little more patient and given that one of those permutations a little more time to figure it out, just because of the upside. Like on a per minute basis, Skinner was one of the Oilers' best players last year, but he didn't really play enough to make enough of an impact. And because his defense was suspect, his forechecking was suspect, Chris Knoblauch preferred to play guys like Vasily Podkolzin over him. So when you have a season like Arvidsson just did, where nothing was inherently wrong, but the cohesion wasn't there, I don't think Victor Arvidsson was a particularly strong style fit, especially to play with Draisaitl. I think Arvidsson, generally speaking, has been more of a rush-based offense player, somebody who's useful at creating in 2-on-1s, 3-on-2s, somebody I think who, frankly, probably would have played better with Connor McDavid than with Leon. And that's not to say Leon isn't a good transition player. He's just not as much of a speed transition player. He's a good skater, but he's a lot more inclined to use body feints and misdirection to create space and opportunities for himself and his line mates. And frankly, as the season went along, you saw him and Podkolzin really develop a synergy on the dump and chase where Leon would send it in from the neutral zone and Podkolzin would follow up and go and get it. And same thing, Podkolzin would be carrying through the neutral zone. He would dump it in, go get it, and Leon would be there. And it's part of why Leon put up one of his best goal scoring seasons of his career, why he won the Rocket Richard. He was playing with complementary guys. And when you're a star, you're a great player, and you're playing with those supplementary pieces, you're going to be more inclined to take more of an active more of an active shooting role, because when the play ends in a shot from Draisaitl, you feel good about that. When the play ends in a shot from the point or from one of the wingers, you don't feel as good about that because they're not as good of a shooter as Draisaitl. And as for Arvidsson, he didn't have a bad season per se, but coming off of that type of year, I understand why the Oilers felt getting that cap space back would be more helpful. And getting that cap space back gives them the maneuverability to make one move. They're sitting with about $5 million in cap space right now, a little over that. And after trading Arvidsson for a 5th-round pick, trading Evander Kane for a pick, you have created 2 top 6 lineup holes. You also have at least 2 bottom 6 lineup holes in Corey Perry and Connor Brown leaving, but we'll talk about that more in our next segment. And really quickly, you are realizing just how tricky it's going to be to put together a really good team. And look, the Oilers are spending more on their defense than their forward group right now. And that might change depending on what Connor's number comes in at and what they choose to do to fill out the bottom half of the lineup. We haven't talked too much about Matthew Savoie or Noah Phillips so far this summer. I think both of those guys are candidates to play some type of role on next year's team, both as an opportunity to kind of seize a spot, but also a cost-cutting measure. If you have a guy who's coming in at $1 million, $1.5 million or less, that puts you in a position where you can financially afford to pay, 2 or 3 guys $30-40 million combined. So it's a real tightrope to walk. It's a real delicate balance. But as for Arvidsson, sometimes, making good decisions, good in theory, doesn't pay off. And I don't think the Oilers would say they regret the decisions they made last summer. Do I think that in an ideal world, they probably would have just kept Dylan Holloway and Philip Broberg as opposed to signing Skinner and Arvidsson? Yeah, probably. I think there's a strong case to be made. They would have done that if they knew now what they knew. If they knew then what they knew now. I knew I was going to mess up saying that. That's why I started talking really slow, like I didn't know what I was saying. Sorry about that. But knowing what you know now, it's really easy to say, yeah, they should have just kept Broberg and Holloway. They should have got those contracts squared away, made sure they weren't vulnerable to offer sheets. And instead, here they are with serious roster holes, not a lot of money to improve, to add, to fill those holes. A massive question in net. Alex Lyon is reportedly signing with Buffalo, so maybe one of the Buffalo goalies becomes available in a trade. Maybe one of the Montreal goalies, whether it's Dobashev or Montembeault, becomes available because they signed a 3rd goalie as well. But right now, you are looking at an Oilers team that, based on how last season went, Nuge, McDavid, Hyman, question mark, Draisaitl, question mark, Adam Henry, question mark, Matthias Janmark, question mark. Are Tomashek, Savoie, Noah Phillip, and Max Jones filling those question marks? I really hope not. Podkolzin and Kapanen, I think you can get away with one of those guys in the middle 6, but not both. I think if Kapanen's playing with Draisaitl and Podkolzin for a good chunk of next year, that's not a good outcome for the Oilers. And I liked what they got out of Kasperi Kapanen last year. He's not a top 6 player in the NHL on a good team. On a bad team, whatever. Yeah, if he's on Seattle, if he's on Chicago, sure. But on an Oilers team that's going to be expected to be a seriously good team, a serious contender, they got a lot of holes, and they don't have a lot of money to fill them. So coming up next on today's edition of Locked On Oilers, I'm going to tell you why moving on from Corey Perry and Connor Brown, though maybe emotionally painful, was the right decision. Coming up next, where we've got your team covered every day. And a big thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Oilers as the debris of NHL free agency and the early stages of the trade market take shape. Real quick, I didn't think Brock Besser was a fit for the Oilers based on finances or on style. I've been very adamant that though I love Brock, he's one of my favorite players. He's not the best of skater. He doesn't really create for others. He's really more of a conventional straight line trigger man, someone who, unless he was going to play with Draisaitl, I didn't really see a fit. And then the money coming in at over $7 million per year, even after dumping Victor Arvidsson, the Oilers only have about $5 million in cap space. So Brock would have had to take significantly less money. I suppose they could potentially be in on Nick Ehlers, but I also don't think the money is going to work there. I think Ehlers really lucked out on the market that's going to be developing here. Marner signing for as much as Marner getting signed and traded really put Ehlers in the driver's seat here as the best player available in free agency. He's going to command, I don't want to say as much as he wants, but I wouldn't be shocked if Ehlers was getting $8.5–9 million per year from Carolina or from Utah, teams that are robust and flush with cap space who desperately need high-end talent. And Ehlers is a very good player. He's one of my favorite analytical darlings. He's a great transition player, one of the best carriers of the puck through the neutral zone in the entire league. There are some questions about his durability, about his motor, about his grittiness, but I am always going to be inclined to take the talent and say we can figure out the rest based on what we do around you. And though I think Ehlers would be a really fun fit for the Oilers, I don't think the money's there. I don't think you could commit what he'd be looking for without jettisoning another player. If there was a way you get out of Nurse's 9.25, then we could talk about Nick Ehlers. But barring that, you have to trade Adam Henrique, who's making $3 million to get to $8 million. And then $8 million still probably not enough to sign Nick Ehlers. And then speaking of money and making things work, Connor Brown signing with the Devils for 4 years for $3 million per year. That's way too much money for what he's going to offer the Oilers. He was a very worthwhile investment each of the last 2 years, even with the performance overages from the year before hitting this season being a little bit of a budgetary constraint. Connor Brown, really solid hockey player. You love the straight line speed. You loved what you got from him on the penalty kill in the playoffs 2 years ago when they had one of the great penalty kills in the history of the playoffs. But for $3 million, he's not going to put up the amount of offense you're going to need for that. And I know I need to reframe my brain around the salary cap being $95.5 million as opposed to $89.5, $88.5, whatever it was this past season. But at the same time, if he's not going to put up 30 to 40 points, $3.5 million, that's too much for what he was going to bring to the table. And I like Connor Brown. He's a good dude. He plays a really honest game. He plays a style of hockey that I understand why Chris Knobloch liked him so much, why he got those opportunities to play with Connor McDavid at various points this past season, why he was a staple on that third line with Adam Henrique. And I wish there was a way they could have made the money work to keep Connor Brown. He's an ideal bottom six guy, but $3 million for that skill set just isn't where the Oilers can afford to be right now. Whether or not that's a Matthew Savoie or Noah Phillips spot, that third line right wing, that remains to be seen. I do think the Oilers are going to need to add at least one or two forwards in free agency, even if they're dart throws, even if it's someone like Max Pacioretty coming off an injury-laden season on an over 35 contract, maybe you look into something like that. But I think the Oilers definitely need to add another forward just purely to have bodies. And then speaking of over 35 contracts, Corey Perry really cashed out, going from $1.1 million as an Oiler this past season to as much as $3.5 million as a member of the LA Kings for this upcoming season. Now, some of that money is structured through bonuses, which won't count against the cap until next year. I'm sure the Oilers could have made an incentive-laden contract, but $3.5 million for what Corey Perry is going to bring to you as a King is crazy. Now, as an Oiler, 19 goals in the regular season, did a really good job in extremely limited minutes. You saw how effective he was in the playoffs. I mean, he was a real key in that second and third round, especially once Zach Hyman got injured in the Dallas series. You saw Perry consistently be the only Oiler who was really getting any net front position, who was getting that first power play opportunity. I was really happy to see the Oilers find something there. And even though last year I was I don't want to say sour, but I felt like they were paying too much for Connor Brown, like they were paying too much for Corey Perry based on what they had given the prior season. And both of them gave reasonable value, but that's the type of market the Oilers are going to need to be in. Now, I understand money is going to be a little bit different now because the cap's up. So the old $1 million is like $2 million now. The old 1.5 is closer to 3. And that's probably why Perry got 3. Perry's weird because it's bonuses and they won't count against the cap till the following season. But when you're talking about good but one-dimensional or limited or role players, you got to be really smart. And for the Oilers, it's going to be challenging to find interesting pieces. Now, there are probably going to be some non-tendered restricted free agents who are enticing. There are probably going to be some guys coming off of injuries or buyouts, very similar to what we had said about Victor Arvidsson and Jeff Skinner. Sifting through all of that and finding the right guys, that's going to be a challenge. But like we said before, the Oilers are going into next season with a lot of question marks. Even if you want to be generous and say of that initial lineup with 6 question marks, which are all the wingers other than Nugent-Hopkins and Hyman, and you want to say, well, Podkolzin and Kapanen are 2 of them. Okay. You still have 2 blanks in your lineup right now, at least 2, if not 4. I'll say 2 based on the idea Savoie, Noah Phillip, or maybe Tomashek is going to be 2 of the 4 empty spots. Even then, you still need 2 more guys. And honestly, you probably need 2 top 6 guys. And if you want to say, well, Leon can drag good performances out of mediocre players, they only need 1. Okay. 1 top 6 winger is going to cost more than the cap space you presently have. And that's why there was a lot of conjecture yesterday about maybe they find a way to trade Adam Henrique and his $3 million to create space to maybe make a play for Besser or for Ehlers. And now, sitting here, you can't trade Henrique because then you're creating another hole. I'm realizing I forgot to put Trent Frederic on my list. Okay. So being that I've been talking out of my butt for the last 5 minutes because I forgot about Trent Frederic. Let's say they want to put Trent Frederic as the 2 left wing. Let's say they put him with Leon. Okay. So you're going to say Podkolzin's the 3rd line left wing. Okay. The 4th line left wing is who? Tomashek? I almost said Zach Jones, not correct. Max Jones. Okay. Do you really want one of those guys as your 4th line left wing? Okay. Even then, you can get away with that. But on the opposite side, who's playing behind Hyman? All right. Kapanen's one of those 4 spots. Savoie, Noah Phillip. Do you feel good about either of those guys in a top 6 role? Savoie, Phillip, or Kasperi Kapanen for that matter? Not really. You need a top 6 winger on this team. And maybe that's an in-season addition. Maybe that's the trade deadline target. And then we still haven't talked about the fact they need another goalie. As much as the Oilers want to say, we don't think there's value out there, we're going to struggle to find the value we're looking for, you can't look at me with a straight face and tell me you feel good about them running back Skinner and Pickard again. Is there a trade to be made? That seems to be the only way, because with Jake Allen re-signing in New Jersey and with Alex Lyon signing in in Buffalo, where are the Oilers finding a goalie? It has to be in the trade market, whether that's Montembeault, whether that's Devin Levy, whether that's Dobyshev, whether that's Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen. The Oilers need a goalie. They need a top 6 forward. Those 2 commitments will cost more than the cap space they already have. Hell, one of those commitments is probably going to cost more than the cap space they presently have, unless they take a dart. If they take a restricted free agent, if they take a player coming off of a buyout or an injury, maybe you can manufacture a decent 15, 20 goal season playing alongside Leon. But even then, it's not a great place to be in with this many question marks. There's plenty of time left in the offseason, but with the limited cap flexibility, it is hard to see a world where the Oilers aren't going to go into the season without at least one major hole. But that will do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. If you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you happen to be listening on Apple or Spotify, please take an extra second and leave the show a 5-star review. If you're watching over on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, hit the like button on the video. Let me know how you feel about the Oilers roster holes. Before we sign off, just got to remind everyone, go check out Locked On NHL wherever you get your podcasts or over on YouTube. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Until then, let's go Oilers.